right, welcome to part 2, week 5. Today we're going to look at your week 5 notebook. Hopefully your assessment is finished. If it is not finished, if you're not finished with your assessment, pause this video. Do not watch it right now. Go finish your assessment. Then come back when it's done. Okay? Okay, cool. All right. So this week you hopefully worked on your assessment already, finished it. Today we're going to look at the 5 story elements kind of as an introductory transition into the second part of creative writing we'll be looking at, which is short stories. Well, stories in general, but creative ones, because there are stories that are nonfiction, but that's another story. Story. I said story too many times. Anyways, so locate your week 5 notebook now. Okay, so in your week 5 notebook, you have this page, which is what we will be doing here in a minute. We'll take notes on the 5 story elements, which are listed right there. We will also be discussing these questions. So before you are done with this video, you should have this filled out and these answered. Okay? Then tomorrow, you will work on this practice, which I'll show you a little bit of an example of here momentarily. So there's only 3 pages in the notebook as you spent the first part of the week working on your assessment. So let's get back to the story elements. Before I go over the story elements, I want us to watch this short video, fun little thing to introduce you to the 5 story elements. The story elements are all required to have a creative story. Every single one of these story elements needs to be present for a story to be creative. This is also the difference, which is one of our questions momentarily, but I'll cover it again, is the difference between creative nonfiction and just a short nonfiction short story, is the presence of these story elements. So let me make this bigger so we can all see it together.
Check it out, yo. Yeah. Setting. That's like where it's going down. Could be the train compartment, a castle, or a town. Could be the Arctic winter, like to build a fire. The temperature's dropping, excitement's getting high. Setting sets the scene, so the scene seems set. Could be an Italian restaurant where we met. Setting gives us the where and the when. Could be modern day, the future, or way back when. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. It's the action, the quest for satisfaction. What's going down, what's going to happen? 4 men to see in an open boat, rowing and hoping that they can stay afloat. The fight they had to make it to the beach, but the waves are big and the shore seems out of reach. Plot is a series of events like Lemony Snicket. It could be crazy, wild, or straight wicked. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. Knock, knock. Oh, it's the characters of people in the story who carry out the action. Characters can be pretty tiny or clean. Characters can be silly, whiny, or mean. Jet is a character, and so is Romeo. Pokemon has characters, and so is Yu-Gi-Oh! Characters can be dogs, lions, or hippos. J.K. Rowling chose Harry Potter. Hold on. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. Snack back in your backpack, we're not finished. Something going wrong. That's a conflict, kids. A struggle in the plot. Now who's on top? Could be a fight for money, like some robbers and cops. Could be an internal conflict, a struggle inside. Like I don't want to tell the truth, but I don't ever want to lie. Fix something in your eye. Now you're conflicted. What created drama? Conflict is. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. scene of the story is the main idea, the central belief, or the topic that's in there. It's usually something abstract like sacrifice, isolation, and resurrection. We back to life like don't lie, don't practice lie-o. To build a fire is survival. Survivor on your own like 5-0. What? Vocabulary, something that you have to get. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting.
If you are not annoyed with me at the moment, I would be surprised, because that song is annoying and gets stuck in your head. But it's a fun little way to remember the story elements in a catchy little tune to get them stuck in your head. Plot, characters, conflict, theme, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things, etc., etc. So these are all essential in any story at all, whether it's like nonfiction, fiction, if you make it up, if it's a long short story, if it is creative, it has these 5 things. The order that we're going to take notes on is different than in the video, because this feels more relevant to how you would be introduced to it sort of in a story itself. So that's why I put them in this order. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take notes. So setting is place and time a story takes place in, like where and when the story happens, but it also is anything in the background of a story. So hold up, am I recording? This is being weird. Yeah, okay, there it is. Sorry, I couldn't find the pause button. So place and time. So it's not just like the place. Like if we had a setting in Homer, you wouldn't just say Homer at 12 p.m. It would also be information about the place and information about the time in history too. Say if it was in the 50s, what is going on in the place, what is common culture in that time of society, etc. So it's all the background of where the story happens. So background might be like the type of people that are there. People can be part of setting if they're not really characters and acting, but they're just kind of like background characters, or people that are just in the town or the space that the story is happening. Those would also go into setting. Okay. Characters are the people or animals or whatever, if we have like a robot making choices or things like that. So it is the person, whether it's a real person or not, person making choices and acting. Now I say that affecting the plot. Okay, because there can be people in a story that are background and just kind of become a part of setting. So if there are people that are not actually affecting the story at all, they're just sort of background characters, like the characters go into a diner and there's a server there that just takes their order one time. That is just part of setting. That is not a new character. That character does not affect the plot at all. Unless the character suddenly like tells them something really important or things like that. But if it's just like diners around them, other people around them, that is not character. Okay, so characters are people or things in the story making choices and affecting the plot. Generally we have like a main character, a protagonist, which is pro, usually we're for that person, in an antagonist, anti, we're against that person. Regardless of like how good or evil those two people are, the protagonist is who the audience kind of roots for, they're for them, and the antagonist is the person or character that we kind of root against. Okay, the plot is all the action taking place by the characters or to the characters. So plot are the events. This is where you would like list the things that happened in a story. That would be in plot. There are different parts of plot we'll discuss in a minute, but plot is essentially the events that happen throughout the story, okay? Conflict is a problem that must be solved by the main character, by the protagonist. It starts the plot. So without conflict, the plot never happens. The story never happens. So we generally, at the beginning of a story, we have what's called exposition, which is like background information where they tell us, the author would tell us about the setting and the characters. And then a conflict happens, and that's when the plot begins. And that would be the inciting incident when the conflict first occurs. And then finally we have theme. What you need to know about theme is that it is never stated in the story. It is never said in the story. Theme is something that we, as the readers, learn from the story. It's a main idea or lesson. It's very similar to like a moral with little kid books that might be like, make sure you brush your teeth every night. Like that might be the moral of a kid's book. In theme, we're talking bigger life lessons or life lessons like friendship is needed, or we need our family, rely on other people, fight for survival, never give up. Those types of things are theme. Okay, so these are the 5 story elements. If you haven't already taken notes on these, please pause. Okay, so now that you have all your notes taken for the story elements, let's talk about the 3 questions that are in your notebook. So the first thing here is that what you need to know about story elements is that they all interact. They are all interconnected. Yes, we like talk about them separately, but then I'll ask you questions sometimes about like how they affect each other. So they all interact all the time. The conflict is what creates the plot. So the whole point of the plot is the conflict. It's to the conflict happens. How are we going to solve the conflict? We've solved the conflict. Now, how do we move on without the conflict? That's the plot, okay? So, obviously, conflict and plot are interrelated. But characters are the individuals that are trying to solve the conflict and acting in the plot. They are affecting the plot, but they also are being affected by other things in the plot, right? So then, this all happens within the setting. And setting can also affect the characters and how the plot happens and things like that. Say they're outside and they have to walk miles outside. Well, that's setting, and if it starts to snow, that might make it more difficult, or if it rains really heavily, like it might make things more difficult to solve the conflict. The setting does. So setting also affects how the characters can solve the conflict. And then all of this leads to them discovering the theme and the lesson, which is usually comes through near the end of the story, specifically with like the resolution, which we'll talk about momentarily. Okay? Now, the story elements are present in all stories. Nonfiction means it's a true story, right? So the difference between creative nonfiction and just general nonfiction is that it contains the story elements. That should say contains, not constraints. Contains the 5 story elements, okay? And then finally, there's 3 different parts of plot. There's more than 3 different parts of plot, but these are the 3 we're going to just talk about, which I actually already talked about 2 of these. Inciting incident is when the conflict is introduced and the character then has to like start going through this process of solving conflict. That's the inciting incident. Climax is generally the most exciting part of the story, but not always. But it is when the climax is fought head on, or the conflict, sorry. So if the characters are literally fighting a monster and they're trying to run away from the monster, the climax would be when the monster found them and they have to like conquer the monster. And then resolution is when the conflict is solved. It's resolved and they sort of return back to a normal part of life. So those are the 3 questions there. Now tomorrow you're going to give an example from any story at all that you know. The Three Little Pigs I just wrote here as a sample, like the pigs would be the character, setting would be their houses, plot would be the wolves trying to